That opening riff meant you were going to have a good time. An arcade classic turned home console powerhouse, Contra broke into the video game scene in 1987. Contra's greatest strength was in its simple premise that was easy and fun to play, but really difficult to master. The game was made to swallow quarters, and it did just that, hammering players with a level of difficulty that was largely unseen in these types of games. However, the challenge Contra created didn't stop players from coming back. Players came for the addictive gameplay, the slew of weapon combinations, and the ability to scream at your friends into covering the left side of the screen while you took the right. In the end, Konami crossed into the home video game market, where it made a major splash on the NES and launched a series of sequels that lasted many decades into the future. At its core, Contra was a run-and-gun game. It also folded in platforming elements. One of the things that makes Contra unique, and honestly so special, is that it was able to take a lot of the standard elements of run-and-gun and evolve them, improve them, and make them into something really, really different. Run-and-gun games have been around since the dawn of video games, including with games like Frontline, Commando, and Ninja Princess. What made Contra different was the way it took some of these elements and shifted them way, way, way off the rails. Contra had a variety of features that were relatively new to the world of run-and-gun. Each level had multiple tracks and pathways, enabling you to move from sublevel to sublevel and easily traverse in multiple directions. This was vitally necessary, as enemies in the game came from everywhere, including in the water. Furthermore, the game didn't just make you travel left to right. Yeah, obviously there were stages like that, but there were a ton of variations, like the 3D stages. Level 3 was also infamous for making you go up. Miss a platform? You're dead. There were also a slew of weapons. The starter weapon was exciting enough, but there was also the machine gun, the laser, the spiral flamethrower, hated that one, and the spread gun, loved that one. Weapons appeared in the form of bonus power-ups that you had to activate. In other words, no power-up was ever a given, and if you lost a life, you also lost your weapon. This feature added an element of excitement to every game. Finally, Contra also had some pretty amazing boss fights, including the defense wall, Grenades, and this guy, Java. He looks like the world's most evil hot dog, with a face! In other words, Contra took the standard run-and-gun formula and injected some meaty steroids into it. The end result was fantastic. As noted before, the game was created by Konami, a titan in the video game industry that had been developing video games since as early as 1977. Games they created included Q*bert and the original Gradius, so they were certainly not new to the genre. Work on Contra began in 1986, and versions started to get released in 1987. Now, there were 3 different versions, one for Europe, one for America, and one for Japan. The only real differences to these were in name and playstyle. The American version was called Contra, while the European version was called Gryzor. Furthermore, the American and Japanese versions allowed for 2-player simultaneous play, while the European version required the players to alternate and play one at a time. Let me circle back to the name for a second. The game was released in 1987, which was after the Iran-Contra scandal took place. In that scandal, high-ranking officials in the United States government, yes, this is relevant, so hang on, were accused of selling weapons to Iran in direct violation of the law. This was to use the money from the arms sale to fund the Contras, a group of rebels in Nicaragua who were fighting the Sandinistas, the governing party at the time. That party opposed U.S. intervention of the country and, generally speaking, was a thorn in the side of the United States. Given the timing, there was a lot of speculation that the game was named after the entire Iran-Contra affair. Now, the official version is that the game title is Contora in Japan, and this was selected because it was supposed to sound like Contra in English, meaning against. However, the final song of Contra, it's called Sandinistas, so you be the judge of that. Now, things get even weirder when you consider the supposed plot of the game. In the arcade versions and in Japan, you play as Bill Reiser and Lance Bean. Great names. The game takes place in New Zealand, where you are battling the Red Falcon organization, attempting to take down their base that will be used to destroy humanity. However, according to the manual for the Nintendo version, the game takes place in the Amazon present day. The rest of the plot is the same, but this could easily be seen as taking place in, I don't know, Nicaragua? The arcade version had 7 stages. The Nintendo version, which you're probably more familiar with, came with 8. Stage 1 was the jungle stage, arguably the most iconic in the entire game. It introduced you to the game mechanics, showed you how to get power-ups, and completed with the defense wall. Beat that, and you were on to Stage 2, better known as Base 1. In this level, you duck and dodge bullets and grenades, all while trying to precisely hit the trigger that will allow you to move into the next block. Now, you can't move forward or touch an electric line, because doing so will temporarily stun you. Don't let those intrusive thoughts win and hit up. That might have been the hardest part of the game. This one's boss was Garmacula and his turret friends. On to Stage 3, the waterfall stage. Here, you had to jump up or fall into a bottomless pit. Most enemies, but not all, came from above, and this slight variation was just annoying enough to make you want to throw your controller at the screen. The moving platforms added another extremely difficult challenge. The main boss here was Grenades, who was so much easier when you played with 2 players. Stage 4? Base 2. Honestly, this was just a harder version of Base 1. Stage 5 was the snowfield, and this ramped up the difficulty in the form of turrets, grenade-throwing enemies, and vehicles as mini-bosses. The spread gun would save you here. The main boss at the end was Gul'daf, an aerial boss, who forced you to dramatically alter tactics than when compared to previous boss battles. Stage 6 was the energy zone. As a kid, I remember this one reminding me of the jungle level, just cleaner. From a playability perspective, this level is a lot harder. There were bad guys with turrets, flamethrowers, and the exceptionally hard Gortys, who is basically a robot super soldier that would force you to make extremely precise jumps in order to avoid him. Now we're at Stage 7, the penultimate level of the game. Stage 7 is the hangar zone. All the colors are a shade of rust. You know it's serious. So now we've got these spikes coming from the ceiling, mine carts for some reason, more turrets, and again, spikes, just in the form of walls. I feel like this was a thing in the 80s. Don't know what to do? Just add some spikes. At last, Stage 8, the final level, otherwise known as the Alien's Lair. You start by fighting Java. Defeat him onto the final boss, Gromerimus King. Blow him up, you've beaten the game and saved the world. One of the most fun aspects of Contra, and this goes for any version, was that you almost had to play with a friend. Contra was an impossibly difficult game, but if you played it 2-player, you were doubling your attack power. There were no differences between 1 and 2-player games in terms of difficulty, so a 2-player version made it a lot easier to beat the game. It was also a blast because you and your friend actually had to communicate with each other and figure out who was going to go where and who was going to shoot who. Speaking of that difficulty, I don't know about you, but I don't remember ever beating this game on my own. Now, this poll is from 2007, so a couple of things have changed in the video game world, but at the time, IGN voted Contra as the most difficult game to beat ever. You and I weren't the only ones who found it tough. That difficulty led to the deployment of the infamous Konami code, which, interestingly enough, was incorrectly referred to by some as the Contra code. For those of you who are unaware, the Konami code is the code that developers put in as a back-end code to Gradius, another Konami property. The code was put in by developer Kazuhisa Hashimoto, who added the code in order to be able to playtest the game and not die over and over again. Inserting the code, up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, would give the player a full set of power-ups and 30 lives in Gradius. In Contra, it also gave you 30 lives. Developers were supposed to remove the code, but they actually forgot. That's why you and I can still take advantage of it today in a lot of Konami games, as well as other games. Contra was a runaway hit. Some of its reviews were relatively middling, at least for the arcade version, but the same version was one of the top 4 biggest grossing arcade games of 1987. The success of the game in its arcade version practically guaranteed that it would be seen on home consoles. As a result, many computer systems and Nintendo adopted the game. Even 20 years later, the demand for Contra would still be strong. Versions would be made for PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360 Live Arcade. Now, there are different versions across different regions, and yes, there are some gameplay and content differences. As I said before, in Europe, the arcade version went by Gryzor, while the Nintendo version in Europe was Probotector, a combination of the words robot and protector. In this version, the weapons and enemies were redesigned to look more robotic. Other changes included different weapons, altered sprites, and slower game speed for the Nintendo version. However, the Famicom version went the opposite way, and was actually able to include more cutscenes. This version also had a long prologue that explained the game's story. Contra's legacy can also be seen in its many sequels, which are still being produced today. Including the original version, there are actually a total of 15 Contra games that have been released for more than a dozen systems. The newest version, Contra Operation Galuga, is a reimagining, per the Konami website, of the original game. It currently has a Metascore of 70 on Metacritic. Contra is great because Contra is silly, stupid fun. Save for the weird political intrigue behind its name, Contra never takes itself too seriously. Instead, it saves its firepower, pun intended, for the platforming, innovations, and ability to keep players on their toes. The game is murderously difficult, and yes, that difficulty can border on frustrating, but at the end of the day, Contra provides an excellent escape for you and a friend. Preferably with a friend. And that is it for this edition of A Game History. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please like or subscribe. It really helps. You can also watch the video that the almighty algorithm has decided works for you by clicking on the most recent video that has since appeared. Have a wonderful day out there, friends, and as always, I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I liked making it. Have a great day.